This week was what's called Inner Renewal Week up at Ananda Village. And at the very beginning of the week, Davy told a story that I've heard a couple of times before. Maybe some of you have too, but it's so completely appropriate for this reading. I can't not tell it again. A little joke. She said there's a farmer who's out tilling his fields, and a man comes driving by in a car, drives up to the farmer, and he asks for directions. He said, "Can you tell me how to get to such and such a place?" And the farmer goes, "Sure, yeah. You go right down there, you go to where the road splits, and you bear to the right, and then," no, wait a minute, that's not right. No, you're going to go the other way, you go down there, you're going to come to the first stop sign, and you're going to bear left. No, that's not right. And then he stops and he thinks for a minute and he says to the man, "You know, you can't get there from here." It's such a perfect story for this wonderful reading. I mean, the two quotes that Swamiji has from the Gita where he says, "You cannot see me with mortal eyes, therefore I give you sight divine." And the whole beginning of the reading, can man see God? And the answer would be no, but can God be seen? But we really can't get there from here. On the frontispiece of Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda's great spiritual classic, there's a quote from the book of John that says, lest ye see sights and wonders, ye shall not believe. And it's interesting that it's there. I think people read the book sometimes many times without even noticing it. But Yogananda is really saying, until we really, given who we are, the nature of the human condition, that until we see miracles, really, until we see something that literally blows our mind, that takes us out of the comfort of how we often live, we would not be able to see the truth. We wouldn't be able to believe the truth. And even really once we start believing it, we then have to test it till it becomes faith. And so he writes us a whole book in the Autobiography of a Yogi that's filled with miracles. I mean, in a way, one could almost say, was that the purpose of the whole AY, just from page 9 on, to listen to this great avatar tell us stories that we would have thought unbelievable before. There's a man whose name is Phil Goldberg. He wrote a book called American Veda. He's actually coming here, I think, in March. Not sure, to East West. But he's been a friend of Ananda for many years. And in American Veda, he writes about the whole coming of another tradition to the West. But he mentions a lot about Yogananda. And I think it was for that book, but it might have been for the book that he's just releasing right now. He did a lot of research, and he asked a lot of people, what brought you onto this spiritual path? And many people said it was a book I read. And the most common book that people said that they read, of his research everywhere, that brought them onto the path, was Autobiography of a Yogi. The second most common book was Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now. Then he went to Ram Dass, and he said, what brought you onto the path? And Ram Dass said, Autobiography of a Yogi. So it's really an extraordinary book filled with miracles that we need to see because it's so hard for us to see the truth. You know, it's right in front of us, but very often we're sort of walking around like this. I don't see anything. I don't know what you're trying to tell me. I don't see a thing. And you want to say, take your hands away from in front of your eyes. Just look at what's around you. I heard somebody who was giving a talk liken this. They told this story, I don't know where it came from, about twins that are still in the mother's womb, and they're having a discussion. And they're saying, I've been hearing this stuff about that there's some mother who's responsible for our birth, and she really helped create us, and if she didn't take care of us, we couldn't exist. And the other twin saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything about a mother. But that's really who we are. Here's this beautiful divine mother who's everywhere, who's given us birth and who's taking care of us. And we're saying, what are you talking about? Most of the time. It's really interesting how hard it is to see the truth. I'd like to share with you 2 stories that I heard last week while I was up at the village. One was another story that Davy told. These are both true stories, by the way. Ananda has a work in India, in the city of Brindaban, where they take care of women who are in great need, mostly women who have been widowed and who would have nowhere to go. And the work has just grown enormously, literally by thousands. By the week, there's thousands more. It's a beautiful work. They're given places to live. They're given food. They're given health care. And the story is that one day there was a woman in India who was destitute, and she was just laying near the side of the road. Again, true story. Really too sick to even move, knew she couldn't get into the next town to get help, was really just expecting to lay there and die. She was starving and didn't have the right clothing, and she was also very ill. And suddenly a man who's driving by stops, and he goes up and he talks to her, and she says, I'm just expecting to die here. And he says, no, that's just not going to happen. So he tells who's ever driving his car to get a rickshaw. And they get a rickshaw, and they put her in it, and he says, I know of a place where you can go. And he tells the rickshaw driver to send her to one of the care homes that are being run. I forget how many there are, but a lot in Brindaban now. Again, this is an Ananda work there. And so he takes her to the home, but the person who's running the home realizes that she's too sick, and they really can't take care of her. She's too much in need. And so he says she's got to go to the hospital. So the rickshaw driver takes her to the hospital, and she's there for 3 months. And finally, she's well enough, and they send her out, and they send her back to the care home. And when she gets into the care home, she picks up a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi, and she says to Shama, the person there, this is the man who stopped by the road to see me. This big picture of Yogananda on the cover. Really very touching story, lest ye see signs and wonders. You know, she is a disciple now. The other story I wanted to share with you is I was walking with a friend up there who told me this story, that she was not living at the village yet, but living in another town, and had a moment, like we all have, either of great pain or filled with doubt. I don't really remember the whole beginning of the story, but she got very demanding with God. Interestingly, she used the line with him that I've used myself, so must be a common line when you're in dire need. She said to God, I need to know that you're in my life. I want you to speak directly to me. No riddles. I don't want to have to figure this out. This is what she said. She said, I want to see your smiling face. She walks outside to go somewhere, and she notices up in the sky that there's a face coming into form. And she literally shook her head, rubs her eyes, but she keeps looking, and suddenly a smiley face is appearing. 10 minutes later, there was a skywriter up there making a smiley face. You know, these miracles are happening all around us. It's so hard for us to notice them even. Sometimes it takes a second time or it takes something else until we can really let in what's going on. The undeniable truth that there's something going on that mortal eyes just can't see, that we can't get there from here. What is this path that we need to travel to be able to realize the divine? This chapter in the Bhagavad Gita is such an exquisitely beautiful chapter. It's called the Divine Vision. That's where these readings came from. You know, the writing of this book, this beautiful book, The Essence of the Bhagavad Gita, more than 600 pages. It's a miracle in and of itself. It's a book that's been written by Swami Kriyananda when Swami was a young man and he was living with Yogananda, which he did for 3.5 years. Yogananda went out into the desert to write his interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita. And he asked Swamiji to go with him. And he said to Swamiji, I asked Divine Mother who to take, and your image appeared. He said, I asked her a second time, just to be sure. And again, I saw you, so I want you to come. And Swamiji sat with Master while Master wrote his whole, Master meaning Paramhansa Yogananda, his whole interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita. Yogananda said to Swamiji, a new scripture has been written. Millions will come to God through this work, he said. I see it. I know it. That's what he told Swami. So Swami always felt that he should publish Yogananda's interpretation of the Gita, but it was not available to him. Yogananda's interpretation of the Gita was not made public, and he couldn't get his hands on it. And he was praying to Yogananda one day, and he said, I know I'm supposed to do this. I feel it. But how am I going to do it when I can't get my hands on your writing? Now, I forget when this book was published, but it was about 2006, I think, somewhere around there, close enough. And Swamiji was with Master from 1948 to 52. It was a lot of years ago. And then he heard Master say to him, don't overlook the possibility of a skylight, as he was praying to him. Now, I've never heard what Swami exactly thought that meant. In fact, I believe I've heard he might have said he wasn't, no, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure he knew exactly what it meant. But I don't remember hearing it. But when I think of it, I have a vision of a light shining down and shining itself on everything that needs to be seen. Swamiji knew it meant he was to write this book. And he wrote this book in India, and wrote it and published it in 3 months. It's 600 pages. That's humanly impossible. Very little editing. So even this book is another miracle right in front of us. He remembered every word that Yogananda said to him in 1951. You know, not something most of us could do, but it all came to him. I thought I would read some of the parts of this chapter that we're reading from, because it's so beautiful. We come to the place, it's chapter 11 in the Bhagavad Gita, and Arjuna, who represents all of us, as we know, most of us know, is sitting in the chariot with Krishna, who represents the divine, and Krishna is teaching Arjuna everything he needs to know to find his way back to God. That's what he's been doing. Now we're at chapter 11. Already more than half of a book of extraordinary wisdom. There's 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita. But Arjuna says to Krishna, at the beginning of this chapter, he says, you've spoken to me, you've been teaching me, you've been telling me everything. Now I need to see you. He's really, Arjuna's begging him, he begs him to let him see him, to really say, I can't see you with these mortal eyes. I need to see you with divine vision. No man hath seen God. How are you going to reveal yourself to me? And in fact, Krishna does. But because Arjuna knows that spiritual eye, the eye of the soul, needs to be opened before he's going to be able to see God. That, and of course, the heart. This is why Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. We can see God if we develop spiritual vision. We can see God if our hearts become pure, filled with divine light. The blessed Lord said, behold, O son of Pritha, by hundreds and by thousands, my divine forms, multicolored, multifarious. And then he gives him a vision, which I'm not going to read to you, but I will read pieces of it as we go. And as Swamiji said in this reading today, this beautiful way that Krishna presents it, some of which I'll share with you and then comment on, but also this poem Samadhi that Yogananda wrote, these two great avatars trying to show us, to share with us, this is what it looks like when you follow this path, when you find your way from where you are to this state of bliss. This is what it looks like. Swamiji said about this chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, he said, I took some poetic license here. He said, I needed to make sure that anyone who read this, the Gita, could really appreciate the magnificence of the experience. And when you go home and you reread this chapter, after we just whet your appetite a little bit here today, you'll see what a perfect job, an utterly masterful job is done sharing something that we have no sort of right to be able to understand. And yet you finish this chapter and you feel your heart's longing for that vision. You feel yourself being drawn on this spiritual path, committing yourself to do everything that we would need to do, to go deep, to feel this unconditional, absolutely perfect love in our lives. It says, Arjuna saw the supreme deity, infinite in variety, omnidirectional in radiance, all pervading, as if adorned on all sides with celestial robes, garlands, and ornaments. And he goes on, and he says, there in that vision did Arjuna behold the vast universe with its endless divisions, all united as one within the form of the God of gods. And then listen to this line. It's so precious. Then Arjuna, wonderstruck, and this is what Krishna says, or Swami, having taken poetic license, I'm not sure, the follicles on his arms raising their hairs in awe. Isn't that beautiful? The follicles on his arms raising their hairs in awe, because it gives us the chills to think about this. You know, it literally makes our hairs stand on end, but never have we thought about the follicles doing that. And it puts us in touch with that awe-inspiring nature of what just happened for him. And yet, it makes it so human for us. It says, you know what it's like to have an experience where your hair stands on end? You too can know this. He brings it right down to our level, which is so beautiful. Let's see where I am here. You know, the way Jesus talks about this, where Jesus says in several places, different places in the Bible, no man hath seen God, no man hath seen God, which is different than saying, no, he's basically saying, no mortal man can be God, seen God. And then they talk about, and Krishna goes on to explain this too, but I'm not going to be able to read it to you, the only begotten. And for so many years that was interpreted as only Christ the man. But both Jesus and Krishna do such a beautiful job of saying, what does the only begotten mean? What is it really? It's that omnipresent energy when it is perfectly still, when it's beyond vibration or before the vibration that set it into motion. The only begotten. So when we are able to realize that place in us, that perfect place of utter stillness. I'm not going to be able to call up the lines from the reading now, and I don't have it. But when Master said, he said, I can't remember, I'm sorry, but he says in Samadhi, from the center of my being, I realized, and he describes everything that went out. From that very center of perfect stillness, no vibration, no duality, the only begotten that really is within each and every one of us, as soon as we're able to find our way there. Arjuna says to Krishna, thou art Vayu, the wind. Thou art Yama, the destroyer and god of death. Thou art Agni, god of fire. Thou art Varuna, the sea god. Thou art Sasanka, the moon. Prajapati, the grandsire of all. He's going through, he's telling Krishna, I'm seeing you because Krishna's given him this vision. Everything is God. And then Arjuna comes to this place where he says, for whatever disrespect I might have shown thee in jest, addressing thee as friend, companion, even calling you Krishna. He's just had this extraordinary experience. And he's remembering that he argued with Krishna in the chariot, that he doubted him at times. He couldn't see who he was. And then he says, now that I see you, can you forgive me? And of course, Krishna knows we're human. God's not going to stay mad at us. But Arjuna just goes on for a while, saying to himself, how can I move from knowing your God back to being in this chariot? And soon he's saying to Krishna, I need to see you in your human form again. I need to be able to love you in that way, because what you've just shown me, he just said, it's too much. Please come back, he says. He literally says, I'm terrified. Come back. It's so sweet. And of course, Krishna just comes back. He does that. So, really, what's happening here is God is wanting to come to us. He waited till he knew that Arjuna was ready. Yogananda says, when we're free of the carping spirit, in the Bible, free of the carping spirit. What does that mean? It means that continual ego line of our constant criticism. God wants to come in, but we're so full of thoughts and desires and opinions, which is part of what Arjuna was saying to Krishna. He can't come in. But as soon as we are willing to empty ourselves of all of what we think we know, all of how we perceive things. God's out there, he's kind of saying, aha, now you're empty. Now I can come in. Now I can fill you with pure love, pure devotion, pure wisdom. We can't walk around like this and expect God to break in. It doesn't happen. We need to find a way to build a bridge from where we are right now to that state of pure bliss. That bridge is really attunement with our guru. That's really what it is. It's that grace. We know really in the end that seeing God, knowing God, attaining that state of pure bliss is God's grace. But remember, Yogananda told us, everything that happens in our life that moves us spiritually forward, 50% God's grace, 25% the Guru, 25% our own effort. But in that 25%, we have to be giving 100% of who we are. We need to be willing. We need to find the courage because, as Krishna says to Arjuna, somewhere else in the Gita, life really is a battlefield. It's just not easy, but you can't quit fighting. You have to make that final climb to find yourself ready to receive this extraordinary grace of God. God wants us to succeed. He wants to reach down and help us. He wants us to feel at peace. He wants our hearts to be open. But he simply cannot do it until we say, I'm here, I'm ready, I'll open my eyes, I'll open my heart. I want you to enter. And as we say every Sunday, take charge of my life.